I'm joined by Mickey Quinn, Longford footballer, or certainly will be back to being one again next year. Mickey, you saw your native county play over the weekend, and we'll come to that in a few minutes, but it was a big weekend of football. Mayo got a win over Leitrim, Offaly beat Carlow, Wicklow beat Wexford, Tipperary saw off Clare, Limerick beat Waterford, Armagh beat Derry, Louth came up short against your Longford, Cavan beat Monaghan, and Donegal saw off Tyrone. We'll start off with Armagh because Armagh are through to the next round of the Ulster Championship, and they're looking in decent enough fettle after beating Derry. They have a semi-final coming with Donegal, and obviously we'll come to that game against Tyrone soon enough. But Armagh beating Derry by 17 points to 15. They're going to be a Division 1 team next year, Armagh. Derry are still going to be a Division 3 team. But it was an awful lot closer than that would suggest.
Yeah, real tight game. Armagh pulled away at different stages. Probably had a strong win in the first half and kind of built up a bit of a lead. But Derry chipped over a few crucial scores with frees in the first half to kind of keep them in the game. But it was interesting the way Armagh are going and setting up with Jamie Clark. In the first half, he was out around the middle and just changing up his game a lot. He was getting on ball out around the middle, spraying passes. Then next minute, he's inside, clipping the ball over the bar. So he's added another string to his bow there that he can change things up. And it keeps opposition guessing on a player like who are you going to put Mark and Jamie Clark. But Rory Grugan was immense for them in the first half. He kicked some really good scores. And then Aidan Faulkner, wearing number 6, but he popped up with scores in the full forward line, whether he stayed in the move or just found himself unmarked and kept his runs going. But there's scores coming from a lot of different places for the likes of Armagh, and that's something it's massive, especially this time of year. But in Championship football, if you're relying on one or two marksmen, it can be your downfall at the end. But when they're getting a spread of scores, Rian O'Neill, Rory Rubin, Jamie Clark, Aidan Faulkner, Oisin O'Neill, and then I think had 3 other scores on top of that. So a massive spread of scores is always a good sign for a team.
Yeah, and just the way that Armagh held on in this game, they were up by 11 points to 5 at half time. They'd had a strong wind at their backs. But Derry came back in that second half, and Jim McCurry, who's the assistant manager for Armagh, he was talking about how they debunked a myth by surviving the comeback, and he says we have to put to bed these myths that we can't play against the blanket defence and that we can't defend the lead. Both of those are put to bed now. From that point of view, it is heartening. So I mean, even in the last couple of, I spoke to Stephen Poacher last week, and he was talking about games in the past where they'd fall away towards the end, concede late scores. There's a couple of games that he referenced, I can't remember them off the top of my head, but were you impressed with the way that they dealt with the fight back?
Yeah, but it was one of those things. As much as there was a fight back, they were always in control up until that last couple of minutes where there was a bit of pressure. Probably got the rub of the green with a soft enough free to put 2 points in. It was a great strike by Rian O'Neill at the end to strike it over the bar against the wind. But if they didn't get that free and there was another attack, you'd wonder, could Derry have pushed them all the way? But no, I think there are a lot of character building games there that they've had through the league where they've come back, or they've withstood comebacks, or even they've went down against a strong comeback. But I think that's only going to stand to them. And that game against Derry, and then it's going to be a tough game against Donegal. But heading into next year, it'll be a telltale next week. But I think Armagh definitely have something to build on for next year, playing Division 1 football, set up nicely with championship games, and then not much of a pre-season that you're running straight into another season, which I think that could put them in good stead for next year.
If you run through some of the talent that this Armagh team has, Rory Grugan, Stephen Campbell, Jamie Clark, Rian O'Neill, Jared Oak, Burns, Oisin O'Neill, Forker, Mark Shields, where do you think they're at in comparison with some of the top teams in Division 1? And obviously Dublin and Kerry feel like they're the benchmark. Tyrone are obviously knocked out of the championship. Donegal, who come up next, they're up in that chasing pack, maybe Mayo also. But where would you put the level of talent that Armagh have with the top teams?
To be honest, next 7 days' time will tell its tale, and for sure you'll definitely know. And Kieran McGee will be the same. He'll be looking and say he's up to it or he's not up to it, and that's going to be the big one next weekend. And it'll answer your question there and then, what guys are up to it and what guys aren't, because Donegal probably a well-seasoned team with a mix of youth and experience there. So whereas Armagh are similar enough too, but probably not to the same level as Donegal. So matchups will be crucial for both those games. But she's, for the likes of Donegal that are going into coming from a game playing Tyrone, you're on about getting your matchups right, and I think that's the joy of this championship, where it's week in, week out. There's no thinking too much about it. It's patch up any batters and bruises and just get on with it, get your matchups right, and recover as best you can, and out again next weekend. And it just shows you the interest that is built with so many games on for the opening round of the championship. That's something that has been talked about for a number of years, that the championship starts off with a Peter, with Galway, Mayo, Roscommon playing New York, and then a couple of weeks later, and it's not the same. But when you have a super Sunday or super Saturday that starts off the way it did this weekend, it just builds such an interest and a following probably for next weekend. I know probably championship will be over a lot quicker, but there's a lot to be said for it too.
Yeah, and I can't wait to see that Armagh against Donegal again, because Donegal, seeing off Tyrone, they really announced themselves for this year. We knew they were a top 5 team anyway, give or take. But for Tyrone, like, it was interesting to see Sean Cavan being asked last night on the Sunday game, did he think that Mickey Harte was the man to stay in the job? He's there, 18 seasons at this point. He didn't want to answer the question at all. And not given the vote of confidence, you almost feel like, well, he wants to say it's time to move on for him, but he feels like he can't through loyalty to the man. How big of a blow is that to Mickey Harte and to Tyrone to be out straight away the first week?
Yeah, it's the only thing is, in comparison to previous years, that it's a short time to get back in the horse, and that's probably one of the things that I would have always said with Longford football, that you lose the championship match and you're out, that the following week the championship's still going on, but you're back with your club, and it could be another 4 or 5 months before you're back playing football with your county, and you don't get a chance to learn and work off that loss. So whereas Tyrone, I don't know, I think that was it the Carlow manager mentioned about back into pre-season 2 weeks later, or in 2 weeks time. It mightn't be that quick, but it means that you can get back on the horse a lot quicker than previously. And at the same time, Tyrone will be disappointed, but with the talent that they have, I think they'll be keen to get back at it with whoever's manager. That's going to be the thing. I think Mickey's still going to be there. I think they're too good of a team to probably step away from. But you look back at everything that he's after doing for Tyrone, and with the talent that he has now at his hands, he might be able to adapt and change things. Old dog, new tricks, but it might be something that he's open to.
Yeah, it was horrible conditions and a real dogfight. But Mickey Quinn, the former Dublin footballer, he tweeted, "A serious battle, but was very enjoyable. Discipline cost Tyrone that game in the end. I wouldn't have taken off either Darren McCurry or Dara Canavan when it's that tight and you need finishers." And I saw Owen Mulligan, who of course played under Mickey Harte, say it was crazy. He said that on Twitter as well. Would you have agreed with that? And it's funny, like, Darren McCurry in the past would have been seen as maybe a flair forward, a fancy Dan forward, but like he's been brilliant since he's back with Tyrone there last year or so.
It's funny too. It's like when you're looking back at different games, and like, probably haven't manager's cap on me, but further down the line maybe. But it's always the corner forward that's whipped, or corner back, because he's getting clean. And sometimes it's the easy option. That number 15 or number 13 or someone that got in that last place on the team that was up for grabs, and you might start, but there's a good chance you're coming off, and there's probably 3 or 4 forwards on the bench ready to come in, and you almost think, wet day like that, someone coming in, fresh legs, they could add a little bit extra. Even if lads are firing and moving well, it could be that change that let's say Mickey was thinking, okay, they're going to lock down, Donegal are going to lock down Cavan quickly here now, so a quick change could be the change that was needed. So you're trying to think of what a manager's thinking is behind these decisions, and I suppose they live by them then, that playing them over in his head, whether that was the right one or the wrong call. That's the crux of the job.
But would you have taken them off?
Probably not. You're looking for a game like that. You're looking for scores, and they're your scores that you had and had proven themselves. So you kind of try and keep them there. And whether you want to try and get on another scoring threat and sacrifice a defender or maybe a workhorse wing half forward or something like that, that would have been probably the approach I would have taken.
And what about the performances of Kieran Thompson and Michael Langan? I mean, they are two beautiful footballers. When you think of the other threats that Donegal have, like Michael Murphy, obviously, Paddy McBrearty not even out in the field, and Jamie Brennan, to have two lads like that can come from deeper and get scores is incredible.
I suppose that's probably the way things are at the moment, and especially with conditions the way they are too. Your top three marksmen on both teams will be picked up by the top defenders on the opposite team, and you almost think they'll nullify themselves as best. Like Michael Murphy will still chip in and contribute what he can, and you can see over the weekend certain players were tagged or marked and they didn't maybe contribute as much, but that's when you're probably your fifth or sixth, seventh best player on the team, where they're at, can step up and be a man of the match or a game changer there, like Thompson and Langan, that you might have nullified Ryan McHugh, for example, and kept Michael Murphy reasonably quiet. You could say that Tyrone's matchups were going well, but who's your matchup for those guys when they contribute what they did? You think you've picked off the top two or three for Donegal, that if we do a job on them, then we're in with a shot to win. But obviously those guys just upped their game.
I'd be very interested to see what you think of how Donegal managed to curb the influence of Conor McKenna. We know how good he was the last 2 weeks of the league. He scored 3-4 in 2 games, setting up chances, and I think in the first half it was Neil McGee on him and he went off with a back spasm, and then Paul Brennan was on him, and I remember that late ball that went in towards the end, it was sort of scrambled away from goal. McKenna was there, Stephen McManaman was on him, and the goalkeeper obviously was there too. But when Mickey Harte was asked about how well marshalled he was, Harte says, if you were watching what was happening in the first half there, I don't think that was marshalling, I think that was manhandling, and I don't think he got the correct protection he deserved from the officials. So Marshall, yeah, you can call it that. I would call it worse than that. What's your thoughts on that? I'm sure you've been kind of earmarked by the opposition before.
Yeah, it's funny too. In one way, you can go 2 ways about it. Going in full forward, right, we have 2 umpires that should be able to keep an eye on everything and report back to the referee. So if he's been marshalled or manhandled, they should be picked up, and Neil McGee or someone on a yellow card, you might get a bit of freedom that way. If that's not working, the other approach is get out round the middle and try and lose your tagger out there and come onto balls from behind the play, and come on late from angles coming in from the side, or let the play go past you and then come on. But from seeing it probably Conor stuck to what his role was or what he was told to do, and probably stayed in for maybe too long, or could have drifted out a little bit more. And that's probably something for a player like him, that you just have to give that bit of freedom and let him play his game. In saying that, if he had to get a toe or his fist to those opportunities, he could be walking away with 2 goals or 2-2 or 2-3. So it's fine margins.
Do you think it was unfair that Tyrone had to go away from home play in Ballybuffet in a knockout championship game when there's no back door? I know there was no crowds, but you know yourself, even if there's nobody there, it helps to play at home, a place you know well, the dressing rooms, whatever it might be.
I suppose yes and no. It's probably a bit of a big advantage, but it's more, if there's people at the game, probably more of an advantage. If that was the original fixture, it would have been more of an advantage for Donegal. So it is what it is. I don't think they would have thought too much about that.
Yeah, and I suppose last year, was it even Tyrone knocked out Donegal there, so you can't really have too many complaints. We'll move on to the Leinster Championship, round 1, your own Longford beating Louth. First of all, 19 to 17. Was it strange for you to watch it? I presume you watched it on a stream.
Yeah, it was, because I kind of was taking stats on the game myself there, looking at kickouts, looking like as if you're still playing, or with a real head screwed on. What's going on here? Why are we doing this? What's happening? But it was one of those games where we were in control for a long period, and we're probably, because of the conditions, struggled to push on and get scores. And one of the big things across the board with all games this weekend was just negative turnovers from handling errors or carrying ball into tackles and losing it. And so one of the things too that you'll find with referees, when the conditions are like that, you either go one way or the other, play on and let things go, or you're blowing for everything. And there seemed to be a fair contrast from one game to the next, what was happening.
Yeah, the fact that one man and one man only scored for Louth, Sam Mulroy, he got 1-7, and 5 of those were from placed balls. Did that suggest that Louth weren't bringing too much to the party?
Yeah, like they weren't. I don't think they were probably fully sure of what they were at going forward at times. And maybe like that, you have one marksman. It's kind of a bit like what we talked about with Armagh. So if you have one man scoring that every score for your team, it's great for that guy and it looks great, but it can be your downfall too. Like to score 1-7 out of 1-7, I'm thinking back, there's probably a number of chances missed that they could have got, a couple of frees here and there, but they always seem to be looking for the main guy there, and shot selection might have let them down here and there. But I think Longford started the game well with Darren Gallagher got in for a goal, played 3-1-2s coming through the middle and just slotted it past the keeper. He chipped in with 1-3. For a midfielder to be taking frees and chipping in with points from play and getting on the end of goals, his work rate is phenomenal, and the way he covers ground, he's marking at midfield, he's scoring points from frees off the ground from play and scoring goals. So he's an all-rounder and he's a massive threat. When you're talking about trying to man-mark a player from midfield, it's very difficult. But he offers something to Longford that takes a bit of pressure off the forwards.
If you're to look at the people who scored for Longford, like Darren Gallagher, as he said, 1-3, Rian Brady and Robbie Smith with 2, Liam Connerton and Daniel Minna with a point apiece. Like, that's a good spread of scorers, and even Robbie Smith, who wasn't there last year, the fact that he's coming in and making that impact in the last 20 minutes is big.
Yeah, it was a good spread of scores, considering it was probably such a low-scoring game too. And like that, you'd love to be seeing a lot more scores on the board. But Robbie was probably a turning point for the game when he came on, and he gave a fulcrum in the full forward line where the lads were willing to play that kick pass in, and that's the other side of things too. With you look back at the Monaghan Cavan game that we touch on too, that the safety factor in not playing that kick pass, whereas fair enough, if the ball goes into the inside forward line and it's coming back out, at least you should have 12-13 men behind the ball that should be able to set up some sort of defence, that's not going to cause trouble. But when you see, for example, the Donegal Tyrone game, where a simple mistake passing it back to the keeper across and a handling error in your own back line can end up in the back of the net, I'd sooner make those mistakes in the full forward line than in the middle or your defensive third.
Paul Davis was pretty upset with the commentary of Longford after giving that game to Cork recently in the league, because obviously it had knock-on impacts in terms of whether Derry could get promoted, I think. Do you think that, did that circle the wagons? Does any of that make a difference, or is it just noise that players don't even notice?
I think it is a bit of noise. I think it's a bit rich, and it turns things around very quickly to go from the safety of the players and the safety of everyone is important, and that's the way Podgy was looking at things, that bringing Cork up is not fair on them. They're already through, and he would have looked at it from their side of things as well as Longford's side, and that it was in the best interest of both teams and managements and selectors, physios, everything, that there's no point in for this. There's a lot of probably permutations that had to go Longford's way or Derry's way for it to work, and who would have thought a few of them did go that way. And I think even at that, scoring difference would have had to come into play too. But I think Podgy was looking at it with his head screwed on from just an overall point of view. And to turn around and say, it's the integrity of the game, it was a decision that was made for the good of everyone, in my opinion. So I think Cork probably were wanted to get a game under their belt to focus on themselves and the importance of their championship game. But there's a lot of bigger things at play, and that's where I think Longford were looking at.
And it's going to be Laois up next, with the prize being a match against Dublin then in the semi-final. How do you feel Longford are set now for this Laois game?
Look, it's one of those things when games come thick and fast, from one week to the next. It's really difficult to judge where anyone's at. Like 5 minutes into a game, you could be, the tails are up and ready to go, or it's very hard to pick yourself up maybe after going 2 or 3 points down, and then a bit of tired legs from the week before comes in. Whereas the likes of Laois could be feeling that bit fresher coming in, which I think at the moment those kind of things are going to play a huge factor. And like what you mentioned about Ballybuffet, Laois having to travel up to Longford, that mightn't be ideal for those either.
Absolutely. And then just finally, one of the games we're going to look at is Cavan beating Monaghan after extra time, 2-15 to 117. This was thrilling stuff. I think Twitter was more or less exploding as this game was going on, and particularly when Raymond Galligan hit that late free from 55 odd metres to win the game at the very end and give it the double guns and everything. What did you make of that game?
I thought the way the first half was going, I was like, okay, second half, Monaghan are going to cut through and they're going to get goals. There's four goal chances, and I was counted 4.5 because I think they had 3, if not 4, fisted points.
Yeah.
And when you see a fisted point, you're always looking, is there a man on the shoulder for a Pam goal here? Could he have squared it? And I think there's 1 or 2 where there was another pass. And probably the fact that they'd missed those goal chances, you'd say, he took the right option. He got the scoreboard taken over. I'd still, looking back, and I still can't understand how Monaghan lost. It's like, if change of tactics. It's almost like one of those things where the manager says, look, we're in a good position here. Don't carry the ball into tackles. And players almost seem to take it extremely literal that, okay, I'm not even going to go forward. Because I saw Brannigan and the way he played in the first half, he was cutting lanes through Cavan. And then he got a ball at the midfield, and there was probably 15-20 yards in front of him, and he decided to turn and went 15-20 yards backwards. Whereas that's not his game. Whereas if he was willing to break forward, possibly the speed he's moving at, 9 times out of 10 it's going to be a foul if he's tackled. And then you have Rory Beggan coming up, basically doing what Rory Gallagher or Raymond Galligan done up the far end. So like it's amazing to see a turnaround so quickly, because Cavan they kept tipping away. Like the first 15 minutes of the second half, it was nearly ready to turn it off. There was no one doing anything, and there's no pressing on kickouts, there's no driving forward, and you could have just fast forward the watch 15 minutes and start again. But just all of a sudden, Cavan just got scoring after again, and then they got a stranglehold on the midfield. Monaghan were able to play the short kickouts, but they weren't willing to probably play it out of defence when the real pressure came on. But it probably shows that how important kickouts are, and how important the conditions are, and wind is going to play a massive role in how teams adapt to that in this year's championship. And then just that game management. Are we going for points? Are we going for goals? Do we need to get another score? Can we defend? Like I think it was mentioned there, if Monaghan had to get maybe 2 more points, I'd say they would have put Cavan to bed if they had to get a couple of scores early. Like if you keep possession for 2 minutes in a game and the opposition is chasing, and then all of a sudden after 2.5 minutes of keeping possession, you chip it over the bar, and then you stretch that out to a 7 or an 8 point lead. That's very disheartening. Whereas, Monaghan, for all the possession they weren't really threatening, and then Cavan were able to counter-attack and get something out of it, or even to hit a couple of wides before they actually got on the scoreboard.
Do you think Banty will look back in that game and think we need to become a more ruthless team? Because this idea of taking the sensible option, that fisting it over the bar, I mean, Dublin will have somebody at the far side of the square, hand pass it to them and palm it in from 2 yards out. Is that something? I presume that's something you have to work on, like, because they're a hard running team. You'd imagine there are people on the shoulder.
Definitely. Like, I heard Jim Gavin was on Radio 1 yesterday, and he mentioned, he was asked if he was the tag of being a ruthless manager, and he said, I don't think I'm ruthless, I think I'm relentless. And it just it was interesting to hear his take on things that, and you look back in the Monaghan game and you're thinking, okay, yeah, if they were relentless going forward and just kept that drive and that running game that they had going in the first half, like, it was the running game that cut Cavan open. And I'd almost say that when Cavan do come up against a team that's running strongly, their tackling is poor. They were fouling and missing tackles when Brannigan, O'Halloran, even McManus was fouled a few times and was lucky, and should have probably got a couple of frees. Desi Ward coming from the fence, Darren Hughes. Like, there's such a powerful middle third for running. It was a crying shame not to see that. But I think they have a balance there as well, man. And I think they're building, they're going to push for Ulster in the next couple of years too. And it's just a shame that you're not seeing them in it, because I think there's a lot of high quality young lads there that they showed what they could do in the first half, and I was just hoping that they'd show it again in the second. But Cavan, credit where credit is due, Gerard McKiernan, some of the guys there, Fortune kicked some wonder scores on the outside of the boot. It's the season for the outside of the boot passes and scores.
Absolutely, and this gives Cavan a great chance of getting all the way back to the Ulster final, because Antrim are next. They will probably expect to win that, you'd imagine. Fermanagh and Down will meet them in the semi-final. But you would have probably seen Mickey Graham at close quarters in the club championship. Obviously you play with Killoa, and he was over Monaghan there for 3 years. Is it any surprise that he comes into Cavan and they're doing stuff like this and getting to that Ulster final last year?
Yeah, like, look, he's one of those fellas. Like, it was no coincidence that it's no more than a soccer game. There's no point, we're 1-0 down or whatever the score is. There's no point in throwing everyone up front with 40 minutes to go and conceding out the back. They kept their defensive shape for as long as they could, and then when they needed to keep chipping away, and you've seen it with Mullinacha for the last number of years. That's very much like them. Scoreboard ticking and clawed their way back. And then when it came to the crunch, they were in the hunt, and then you just had to get the right players to the ball. And they won the dogfight around the middle. For those last number of kickouts, I think there was crazy stats. Like, out of 9 Monaghan kickouts, I think they could have won 6 or 7 or something like that at the end. So, and that was probably Thomas Who was it? Thomas Riley, wasn't it?
Well, that scored which one?
That came on. He came on at half time at midfield. He caught
Thomas Callaghan, yeah, the big man, number 23.
Yeah. So he turned the game around for Cavan.
Absolutely. Well, look, we could go through plenty of the other games as well, but I know you have to go and mind your little baby there. So I appreciate you joining me, Mickey.
No bother at all, Shane. Thanks a million.